Bismillah walhamdulillah wa salatu wa salamu ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa ashabihi wa man tabi'ahum bi isanin ila yawmiddin wa ba'd. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Tonight, first Tuesday of the month, we're going to be looking at tafsir of the Quran. This is in the book Fath Rahmani fi Tafsir al-Quran by Mujiruddin al-Ulaymi rahimahullah ta'ala. We've been looking at the book quite some time now, at least 2 years. And we are continuing to look at the chapters in Juz Amma. Tonight's going to be all about Surat al-Buruj. So Surat al-Buruj is a Makkan Surah revealed in Mecca, contains 22 verses, 464 letters, and 109 words. After Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَالسَّمَاءِ ذَاتِ الْبُرُوجِ. And this is translated as, by the sky full of constellations. وَالسَّمَاءِ ذَاتِ الْبُرُوجِ. So you have to note right off the bat, as some of these chapters in Juz Amma begin with Waw al-Qasam, like Wal Asr, etc. So here you have وَالسَّمَاءِ ذَاتِ الْبُرُوجِ. So by, meaning Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala swearing by the sky full of constellations, al-Buruj. So many of us understand the word Buruj from Burj, which literally means a tower, okay? But here in this context refers to the stations, manazil, these which were known to the Arab. These are like manazil ash-shams wal-qamar. Okay, these are like the phases or the stations. We'll talk about what that means. These were known to the Arab, and they were 12 in number, so 12 stations. And these stations are passed over by the sun in the duration of 1 year, and by the moon in the course of 28 days. And of course, the way that we see these things, or the way that it's being explained to us in the Quran, is how we see them. Okay? So we see the heavenly bodies like the sun, we see it moving, etc. That's important to note. That sometimes in the Quran we're being addressed by what's perceived by us, and maybe not the reality of the thing itself. Okay, so like if you look at astronomy, the way that they explain the constellations is they do it from a earth-based perspective, and they draw a celestial sphere, which is another globe-like sphere outside of the earth, and it has the constellations mapped on the sphere, and that sphere moves instead of, that's the way that it's explained, as opposed to the earth is moving, and then our perception of things is such that they're moving around us, as if the earth was the center and everything else is moving around us. So basically that needs to be understood, so that someone doesn't come and say, hey, look, this is contradicting reality or what's been measured and understood of existence. But rather, this is a perspective from the earth, what we see. So these Buruj here, as I said, constellations, the sun passes over these 12 manazil, or phases, or stations, if you will, over the course of a year. And the moon passes over them in the course of 28 days. And these stations have been mentioned previously in Surat Yunus and Surat al-Furqan, just to name 2 ayat in the Quran. The author, rahimahullah ta'ala, mentions that. So the first that you would note in Surat Yunus, this is chapter 10, verse number 5, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, هُوَ الَّذِي جَعَلَ الشَّمْسَ ضِيَاءً وَالْقَمَرَ نُورًا وَقَدَّرَهُ مَنَازِلًا. So here you find the word manazil. He says, He is the one who made the sun a radiant source. هُوَ الَّذِي جَعَلَ الشَّمْسَ ضِيَاءً, made a radiant source. And the moon, وَالْقَمَرَ نُورًا, and the moon a reflected light. Radiant source meaning it emanates heat. Diya is a light which produces heat. And nur is a light that is not going to produce heat, but it is going to be reflected, as is the moon. Right? We understand the moon doesn't produce light, but it reflects light from the sun. And so you can see the difference between diya and nur here in the verse. He says, وَقَدَّرَهُ, and destined them, or decreed for them, manazila, phases. These are the manazil. لِتَعْلَمُوا عَدَدَ السِّنِينَ وَالْحِسَابِ مَا خَلَقَ اللَّهُ ذَلِكَ إِلَّا بِالْحَقِّ يُفَصِّلُ الْآيَاتِ لِقَوْمٍ يَعْلَمُونَ. And Allah did not create, see, I should go back here quickly. He made them in phases so that you may know the number of years and calculation of time. Basically, that's how we keep track of time, right? The moon, as we see, the moon's phases, and then we can see the first day of the month is when there's the birth of the new moon, and then we can track the days, and we have Ayyam al-Bid, which is the middle of the month, when the moon is at its fullest, and then as it begins to diminish until it disappears, we know we're at the end of the month, so we can calculate our days, and we calculate our months. When does the month begin? With the moon. And then we have the sun, and we can calculate the time of the year and the seasons, etc. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has put them in these phases so that we would know times of the year and calculation of time. Allah did not create all this except for a purpose. He makes the signs clear for people of knowledge. Again, this is Surat Yunus, verse number 5. Another verse which Imam al-Ulaymi indicates is in Surah Al-Furqan, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, تَبَارَكَ الَّذِي جَعَلَ فِي السَّمَاءِ بُرُوجًا وَجَعَلَ فِيهَا سِرَاجًا وَقَمَرًا مُنِيرًا. Blessed is the one who placed constellations, buruj. So we're back to that same word that we said means towers, buruj, in the sky. جَعَلَ فِي السَّمَاءِ بُرُوجًا, the constellations in the sky, as well as radiant lamp and a luminous moon. وَجَعَلَ فِيهَا سِرَاجًا, a radiant lamp is the sun, وَقَمَرًا مُنِيرًا, and a luminous moon, of course. This is Surah Furqan, chapter 25, verse number 61. So there you see the two verses that Imam al-Ulaymi, he indicates or points to, and how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has, again, explicitly mentioned the manazil, and then mentioned the buruj. So those things, they go together. So again, the word al-Buruj, which is the chapter that was recited just now, the singular word for buruj is burj, and it is a raised dwelling or a station, al-manzil. It's a station or a raised dwelling which is positioned high up on the face of the earth, like a tower. And that is like what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says in another verse in Surah An-Nisa, this is verse number 74, chapter 4, verse number 78, excuse me, when Allah says, أَيْنَمَا تَكُونُوا يُدْرِكْكُمُ الْمَوْتُ وَلَوْ كُنْتُمْ فِي بُرُوجٍ مُشَيِّدَةٍ. It says, wherever you may be, death will overcome you, even if you were in fortified towers. وَلَوْ كُنْتُمْ فِي بُرُوجٍ مُشَيِّدَةٍ, even if you were in lofty towers. So here you can see the same word being used, and there's a different context to each usage of that particular word. So in the context of this verse in Surah An-Nisa, it's talking about if someone were trying to hide away from death in a castle, right? And that's typically where they would find the most solid defense from an onslaught of attack, would be in their fortified towers and their castles high up off the ground. And so death would overcome you even if you were hiding in the most safest and secure places. So that's that verse. The other verses, in particular this one, وَالسَّمَاءِ ذَاتِ الْبُرُوجِ, refer to the various constellations through which the sun and moon travel, often referred to as the zodiac. You recognize that word, the zodiac signs? And there are 12 of those. And zodiac is like animals in Greek, I think. And that's because those constellations, the majority of them are shapes of animals. And these constellations have been known, not just in our time, but have been known before, they say early on, like the time of Nuh alayhi salam. And those zodiac signs were passed down as markers of the heavens. And then eventually they were adopted, they were given to the Greeks. And then the Greeks, they took them and then they did their thing with them. And now we have like the zodiac signs, and, you get all of the, what are you? Oh, you're a this, and you have a certain personality, and you're going to get a this tomorrow, and you're going to this and that and the other. And like you get all that mythology that gets built around all of that stuff over the course of time, with people and cultures and religions or whatever putting their own little framework on it. However, it's very clear in the Quran, as we saw, that these buruj have been created to, obviously, number one, very practically to tell time and etc., but also as a form as a display of Allah's power and might over creation. So these are the zodiac symbols that we're talking about here. So the moon travels through a single station. So these 12 stations, and they go around us, if you will, around the globe in the night sky. The moon travels through one station in 2 1/3 days. And then the moon is concealed for 2 days. So like 28 days typically. The sun travels through a station in 1 month, which gives us the 12 months of the year. I guess that's how you could calculate it on average. So that is, as it pertains to the first verse, وَالسَّمَاءِ ذَاتِ الْبُرُوجِ. The next verse, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَالْيَوْمِ الْمَوْعُودِ, which means, and by the promised day. وَالْيَوْمِ الْمَوْعُودِ. So we're still, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is swearing by these things that He has created. وَالْيَوْمِ الْمَوْعُودِ is the promised day. And the promised day means the day of resurrection. And this, of course, is the day that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will judge between creation. He says, وَشَاهِدٍ وَمَشْهُودٍ, and the witness and what is witnessed. The witness here, وَشَاهِد, it's still, waw al-qasam, we're still dealing with that. وَشَاهِدٍ, and by the witness. Shahid here is talking about the day of Jum'ah, Friday, which witnesses everyone according to their actions. And what is witnessed here is, وَمَشْهُود, is referring to the day of Arafah. وَشَاهِدٍ وَمَشْهُود, so you have Friday and the day of Arafah. And the day of Arafah is attended by the people, of course, during the seasons of Hajj, as well as being attended by the angels, al-malaika. So, وَشَاهِدٍ وَمَشْهُود, these are the two most prominent understandings of the words, respectively, Friday and Arafah, though there are numerous other things that have been mentioned as to what shahid and mashhud means. So if you were to look at larger works of tafsir, then you would find various different opinions going back to the time of the companions and onward. There is a hadith related to this in which the Prophet ﷺ, he said, and by the promised day, this verse, وَالْيَوْمِ الْمَوْعُودِ, he said, and by the promised day, this refers to the day of judgment. وَشَاهِدٍ وَمَشْهُودٍ, he says, وَشَاهِد, and by the witness, this refers to Friday. And the sun does not rise or set on a day that is better than Friday, he said, alayhi salatu wasalam. During it, there's an hour that no Muslim servant catches, if you will, while asking Allah for some good, except that Allah will give it to him. He does not seek refuge from any evil in it, except that Allah will protect him from it. So that is washahid. So we're talking about Friday. So this hadith is reported or found in the collection of Ibn Khuzaymah. And then he says, وَمَشْهُود, and this is referring to the witnessed. He says it refers to the day of Arafah. So this is collected from the Prophet ﷺ. And there are other hadith that are similar to this in nature. It goes on in the next verse, he says, وَقُتِلَ أَصْحَابُ الْأُخْدُودِ. قُتِلَ أَصْحَابُ الْأُخْدُودِ. Destroyed are the makers of the ditch. And so some of the great scholars of tafsir, like Imam al-Ulaymi, he said that this verse here is going to be in response to the waw al-qasam, which is the oath, if you could translate it like that. So this is the response to that oath. He says the response to the oath has been omitted. He says, وَقُتِلَ أَصْحَابُ الْأُخْدُودِ. And it's as if what is being said in this verse, قُتِلَ أَصْحَابُ الْأُخْدُودِ, destroyed are the makers of the ditch, that they are cursed. That they're cursed. They're cursed, and by extension, who this is being directed at is the Meccans. And he's basically saying that they will be cursed like the makers of the ditch will be cursed. And the disbelievers of Mecca are being cursed like this because of their rejection of the Prophet ﷺ and their rejection of the Quran. So here, قُتِلَ أَصْحَابُ الْأُخْدُودِ, destroyed, meaning cursed, are the makers of the ditch. And so the ditch here, al-ukhdud, is a channel, as many of us would understand. It's dug into the earth, looks like a river. The plural of it is a khadid, in case you were wondering. And the makers of the ditch, historically, and you also find in hadith literature, totaled 3. There was one that was built in the Mediterranean in Sham, or I should say dug. And this was dug by Antalius, the Roman. I'll leave the name in Arabic because I can't quite figure out what the English equivalent to that is. It's one of the Roman emperors, and he dug a ditch like this in the Mediterranean. There was Bakh-Nasr, the Persian. He's known as Nebuchadnezzar. And there was Yusuf Dhu Nuwas. And this was done in Najran, which is in the Arabian Peninsula. So it's said that each of them, they dug this very large trench or ditch, if you will, in the land. And some have estimated that it was approximately 40 cubits in length and 12 cubits in width. So you understand the cubit is the forearm span from the elbow basically to the hand. So 40 cubits long and 12 cubits wide. And they filled it with fire and said, whoever does not disbelieve will be thrown in. And so whoever disbelieved, meaning they left their faith in Allah, they were let go. And whoever refused to disbelieve and they held on to their faith, they were thrown in. So these were 3 ditches or channels that Imam al-Ulaymi mentions, and you'll find this also in other works of tafsir. Ibn Kathir also mentions this as well. It's been mentioned, however, that the verse, this verse in particular, is in reference to the ditch that was dug in Najran by Yusuf Abu Nuwas. And there's a lengthy argument about the details, or I should say the exact nature of the verse's revelation. But if we were to take this, that it's referring specifically to Yusuf ibn Shahrabil, Sharahabil, he is a convert Jew who grew out his side locks. That's nuwas. Those locks, they're known as nuwas. They called him Dhu Nuwas, the man of the side locks. And in the early 500s, he gained control over the Himyarite kingdom in Yemen. And those were the people that ruled in that region. And when he gained control of that kingdom, so basically during that time, it was ruled by the Jews, and the other religion was pagans. So those were the religions of that region, the Jews and the pagans. And then after that, and then there was a kind of a Christian presence that was now coming to proselytize, if you will, and expand their kingdom, because you know right across the Red Sea was Ethiopia, and that was a Christian kingdom. And that Christian kingdom had a king, and we know there was a king there. The title of the king was Najashi. And then they reported to the Roman Christians, and so they were expanding. And so they were having this presence of people coming into Arabia to preach, basically go start spreading the word, and the kingdom will follow, basically. And so what happened is Dhu Nuwas, he laid siege to that group of Christians that were located in Najran. And if you remember in the Quran, the Prophet ﷺ visited that region, the Christians of Najran, and that's where the verse was revealed, in kuntum tuhibbun Allah fattabi'uni yuhibbukum Allah. If you truly love Allah, then follow me and Allah will love you. So their presence was there. Dhu Nuwas went in there, he burned down the churches, and he killed many of the inhabitants. And some of the scholars have said that he burned 20,000 people in that ditch that was full of fire. And this was likely done because he saw Christians as an invading force that threatened the stability of their kingdom. So they were seen as the invaders, and the Jewish kingdom, led at the time by Dhu Nuwas, was now on the offense, the defense in an offensive way, basically trying to drive them back. And then in response to that massacre, the Byzantine emperor sent the Christian kingdom of Ethiopia to Yemen in order to take control of the Jewish kingdom. And that was the end of, they said, the end of the Jewish rule of the Himyarite tribe. And the Christian kingdom was there for some time, and eventually, I think it exchanged hands a couple times. And then we get the story of, later on, we get the story of Abraha and the elephants. So you can see there's some geopolitical things happening. Obviously, we know in the Surah, but also you can see some of the verses are making reference to those things. So that's one issue directly tied to this particular verse. There's also a very lengthy hadith associated with it, in which the Prophet ﷺ, he said that there lived a king before you, and he had a court magician. And as the magician grew old, he said to the king, he said, look, I've grown old, so send me a young boy so that I can teach him my magic. And the king sent him a young man so that the young man could be trained. And on his way to the magician, the young man passed by a monk who was sitting. And he stopped and he listened to the monk talk, and what he heard impressed him. And so it became his habit that whenever he would go to be trained by his magician, he would stop at the monk and he would sit there. And he would end up being late to the magician. And because of that, the magician used to beat him every day for being late. And he would complain, obviously, to the monk that he was being beaten and he was afraid of the magician. And basically he came up with an excuse to the magician that while he stopped at the monk, he would go and say, look, I've been detained by my family. And then he would end up being late to go home. And he said, when you feel like, if you're afraid to go home because you're late, then just say, look, the magician has detained me. I've been late because of my teacher. And so this way he could continue to visit with the monk. And then he would also have to go on to fulfill his obligation of learning from the magician. And then one day it says in the hadith that there was a huge beast of prey that blocked the road, preventing the people from passing. And the young boy said that I will come to know today whether the magician is superior or the monk is superior. So he picked up a stone and he said, oh Allah, if the affair of the monk is dearer to you than the affair of the magician, cause death to this animal so that people should be able to move about freely. And so he threw the stone at the animal and he killed it. And the people began to move about, going and coming on the path that was once blocked. Then he went to the monk and he informed him that the monk said, he said, listen, today you've become superior than I. He says, your affair has come to a stage where I find that you would be soon put to trial. And in case you are put to trial, don't let them know about me. And time went on, the young man starts to treat blind people, starts to treat the leper. He starts to help these people with their illnesses. And he was able to cure them. And then eventually, a companion of the king who had gone blind heard about him. He came to him with numerous gifts and he said, if you cure me, all of these things that I've collected, they'll be yours. And he said, look, I don't cure anybody. The boy. He said, it's Allah who cures. And if you affirm faith in Allah, meaning shahada, I will also supplicate that Allah cures you. And so the man affirmed faith in Allah, and Allah cured him. And then he went to the king, and he sat by his side, as he used to sit there. And the king said to the man, who gave you your eyesight back? How was it restored? And he said, my Lord, he said, my Lord, meaning Allah. And the king said, do you mean you have a Lord besides me? He said, my Lord, and your Lord is Allah. So the king took hold of that man and began to torture him until he basically ratted out the boy. And then the boy, or we should say the young man at this point, was summoned to the king. And king got him there and he said, listen, someone told me that you've become so proficient in your magic that you cure the blind, right? Because this was the idea. The king was going to send this boy to learn magic, and he's assuming that he's with the magician. No idea about the monk. Remember, there's a whole story to get out of the situation. And he basically says, you've become so proficient in your magic that you're able to cure the blind and those suffering from leprosy. He's basically saying, do you do these things? Cure the blind and heal the leper. And again, he says, I don't cure anyone. It's Allah who cures. So the king seized that young man, began to torture him. And if you remember, he told his teacher, the monk, told him not to let him in on his location or his whereabouts. And because of the torture, somebody can turn that on. Because of the torture, the young man was unable to withstand that, and he gave up the monk. And then the monk was summoned. And he was told to turn away from his religion. Right? The king told the monk to turn away from his religion. The monk, however, refused to turn away from his religion. And so it was ordered that a saw be brought, like the saw that you cut wood with, brought. And the king had it placed in the middle of the monk's head and sawed the man in half. Tore him into parts, which fell down. Then the courier of the king was brought, and it was said to him, turn back from your religion. And he refused. Basically, there was becoming a movement now. People are beginning to follow after the religion of this boy, because he was now helping them, and he was telling them, look, if you believe in Allah, then Allah will cure you. He will pray, and Allah will bring health and restore your health, etc. And so, the same thing, this man refused to return back from his religion, and the king sawed him in half again. Then the boy was brought forward, and he was told to leave his religion. And he refused to do so. And so he was handed over to a group of messengers, if you will, or couriers. And the king ordered them to take him to a mountain, to such and such mountain, and make him climb up that mountain. And when he reaches the top, tell him to renounce his religion. And if he doesn't renounce his religion, then throw him off of the mountain. And so they took him to the mountain. They made him climb up the mountain. And the boy began to pray. He said, oh Allah, save me from them, the people that were taking him up there. Save me from them in any way that you like. And when he prayed, the mountain began to shake. It's like an earthquake. And all of those men fell down, except for the young man. And then he went back to the king, walking back to the king without those guards. And he basically asked, what happened to the people that were with you? And the boy said, Allah saved me from them. So then he handed him over to other guards or couriers. And he said, listen, take him in a small boat. And when you reach the middle of the ocean, tell him to renounce his religion. But if he doesn't renounce his religion, then throw him in the water and basically let him drown. And so they took him on this boat. They were riding him out there. The boy's praying, oh Allah, save me from them and do whatever you will to them. And as soon as he started to pray, the boat turned over and they were all drowned, except for the young man. So the young man goes back walking to the king. The king said, what happened to the men? And he said, Allah saved me from them. And then he said to the king, you'll never be able to kill me until you do what I ask on my terms. So the king said, what do I have to do? He said, you have to gather all the people together in one open area, then hang me up on a tree. Take hold of an arrow from the quiver and say, in the name of Allah, the Lord of the young boy. And then shoot the arrow. And if you do that, you'll be able to kill me. You have to say, Bismillah. Okay? And so the king, he called the people, put them in an open plain, tied the boy to the trunk of a tree, took hold of an arrow from his quiver. He placed the arrow on the bow, and then he said, in the name of Allah, the Lord of the boy, and he shot the arrow. And the arrow hit the boy in his head, in his temple. The boy placed his hand upon his temple when the arrow had hit him, and he died. And the people said, all the people that he had gathered, the king had to gather all those people. He said, we affirm our faith in the Lord of this young man. We affirm our faith in the Lord of this young man. We affirm our faith in the Lord of this young man. And then the couriers of the king, they went and they said, look, do you see that Allah has actually done what you tried to avert? You tried to avoid the spreading of this religion because he was the Lord. He was, he was the one. And so the king at this point commanded that ditches be dug, and this is where we get the ditch, or that canal, at very strategic points along the path. And when these ditches were dug, there was a fire that was lit in them, and it was said to the people that they should turn back from the boy's religion. And if they turned back, they would be safe. But if they didn't turn back, they would be thrown into the fire and made to, they would basically be pushed in, or they would be made to jump in. And so the people, they accepted that. They would not reject their religion, and they would be pushed in. And this happened until a woman came. They were all willing to do that. And she had her child with her, a mother and her child. And because of that, she was hesitant to jump into the fire. Until her child said to her, "Oh, mother, endure the punishment, because this," meaning the religion of the boy, "is the truth." And they were thrown into the fire. And so this is what the Prophet ﷺ mentioned as quite a rather lengthy hadith in regards to those who dug the ditch and what the ditch was used for. So you have several different explanations or backstories for this. What happened with the nuwas, the side locks, or what happened here with the boy and the magician and the king. So following that, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, "An-nari dhatil waqud." The fire here, which basically is referring to the ditch filled with fuel. And basically what it contains is the fuel. So when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, "An-nari dhatil waqud," He's basically talking about the ditch still. "Idhum alayha qu'ud," when they were sitting near it. Meaning the people that dug it, they were the ones that were now sitting in chairs, torturing people. They were sitting along the banks of that ditch. Again, as I mentioned, they estimated that they burned approximately 20,000 people in those flames. وَهُمْ عَلَى مَا يَفْعَلُونَ بِالْمُؤْمِنِينَ شُهُودٌ. And Allah says what means, and they, وَهُمْ, and we're talking about the king and his companions, or his army or his soldiers, عَلَى مَا يَفْعَلُونَ بِالْمُؤْمِنِينَ شُهُودٌ, to what they were doing against the believers, and what they were doing was torturing them. They were witness to that, meaning they were all there present. They were watching alongside of the bank of that channel. Allah says, وَمَا نَقَمُوا مِنْهُمْ إِلَّا أَن يُؤْمِنُوا بِاللَّهِ الْعَزِيزِ الْحَمِيدِ. What means here? And they resented them not, except because they believed in Allah. Meaning they didn't find fault in them other than the fact that they had iman. And this is why they were put to death, or that this is why they were tormented, because they believed in Allah, Al-Aziz Al-Hamid. And so here you see Al-Aziz Al-Hamid. Allah is described as being Al-Aziz because, for the most part, Allah's punishment is feared. And He is described as being Al-Hamid because He bestows favor upon His creation, and people hope for His reward. So He's praised. الَّذِي لَهُ مُلْكُ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ وَاللَّهُ عَلَى كُلِّ شَيْءٍ شَهِيدٌ. In the next verse, basically affirming the previous verse, Allah says, "To whom belongs the dominion of the heavens and the earth?" الَّذِي لَهُ مُلْكُ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ. He belongs the sovereignty of the heavens and the earth. And Allah is over all things witness. وَاللَّهُ عَلَى كُلِّ شَيْءٍ شَهِيدٌ. Meaning, over all things, here He says, all things is referring to all of the deeds that are committed by mankind. And Allah is a witness to that, and this is a reminder that He is deserving of faith and deserving of worship. It says, إِنَّ الَّذِينَ فَتَنُوا الْمُؤْمِنِينَ وَالْمُؤْمِنَاتِ ثُمَّ لَمْ يَتُوبُوا فَلَهُمْ عَذَابُ جَهَنَّمَ وَلَهُمْ عَذَابُ الْحَرِيقِ. The next verse reads, what means, indeed those who have tried, here, فَتَنُوا, or who have tortured, here specifically, عَذَّبُوا, they have tortured the believing men and believing women with fire. That's what they tortured them with. Remember, we're talking about those ditches that were filled with fire. Fuel was poured into them, and then they were set ablaze. And they have not repented. Those that have done so and then not repented will have the punishment of hell. So today you don't have to dig trenches and put a fuel in fire. You can use white phosphorus bombs and catch people on fire and burn them to death. I mean, there's ways that we see this playing out today in the world right now. These people burned 20,000, and today, وَلِيَعُوذُ بِاللَّهِ, we don't know. I mean, right? I mean, those numbers, they continue to mount. if you catch my drift. So this was something that happened to the people of faith before. Was it not? That's what we're talking about. And again, it's going to happen again, simply because of their faith, who they are. So here, those that have not repented will have the punishment of hell, and the punishment of hell will be due to their disbelief, and they will have the punishment of the burning fire. So here you note two things. Two things. And the burning fire will be more severe than the first, meaning they burned the people of faith, and their punishment will be a more severe burning in the hereafter, because of that burning, because they burned those people due to their faith. So here you have فَلَهُمْ عَذَابُ جَهَنَّمْ وَلَهُمْ عَذَابُ الْحَرِيقِ. So here, two things. Imam al-Ulaymi draws our attention to the fact that Jahannam and al-Hariq are two levels of the fire. So we understand that Jahannam, or we should say that an-nar, that's the best way to describe it in general term, an-nar, the fire, is darakat. There are levels in decreasing order, like Jannah has darajat, increasing levels. So at darakat an-nar, there are various different names that have been mentioned in the Quran, according to many scholars. And so Jahannam is one of those levels. It's the name of one of those levels. And Imam al-Ulaymi is also saying that al-Hariq is another level within an-nar, within the fire. And I think we've mentioned this in the past, some of the names of the various different levels of the fire. We seek Allah's refuge from such a destination, such a torment. The next verse he says, إِنَّ الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ لَهُمْ جَنَّاتٌ تَجْرِي مِنْ تَحْتِهَا الْأَنْهَارُ ذَلِكَ الْفَوْزُ الْكَبِيرُ. Here, in this verse, of course, the previous verse mentioning what's been prepared for the deniers of faith and the wicked who have tormented the people of faith, he then mentions what's been prepared for the faithful, saying that surely those who believe and do good will have gardens under which rivers flow. And of course, this is the greatest triumph, the greatest victory, because when you look at this world, there's no comparison. It's insignificant. The word insignificant doesn't even measure up to the difference between this life and the bliss and joy and happiness that one would find in Jannah. Right? So basically saying, whatever little that you have, whatever you suffer in this life will be meaningless to what you will experience in Jannah. It will seem as if it was nothing. It was a speck, a drop, it's nothing. Based on what's awaiting for those of faith in Jannah. Allah says in the next verse, إِنَّ بَطْشَ رَبِّكَ لَشَدِيدٌ. Indeed, if we translate it literally, the grip, and what this means here of your Lord is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala taking people to task or punishing them. And it is severe, he says, لَشَدِيدٌ, meaning it's multiplied in severity. Right? So, and we can see that in a way here when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes what the people did by burning them in these fiery ditches, and then the recompense for that would be, not only would they be in Jahannam for their disbelief, but they will be suffering from al-hariq, the burning flames of an-nar, which would be more severe than what they did. So the punishment of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is multiplied in severity for those deserving of it. إِنَّهُ هُوَ يُبْدِئُ وَيُعِيدُ. For he is certainly the one who originates. إِنَّهُ هُوَ يُبْدِئُ. He's the one that originates, meaning he created all of creation. And he's the one that restores, وَيُعِيدُ. And that is, of course, in reference to the resurrection. So it is, إِنَّ لِلَّهِ وَإِنَّا إِلَيْهِ رَاجِعُونَ. To Allah we belong, and to Him we shall return. He's the one that's created us, and we shall return to Him. وَهُوَ الْغَفُورُ الْوَدُودُ. And He is Al-Ghafur. He forgives those who repent. And Al-Wadud, showing love to His awliya. And the way that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala shows that love to His awliya is through forgiveness. Dhul Arsh al-Majid. And He says in the next verse, Lord of the throne. The throne here, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, of course, created that, the most magnificent, grand, sizable creation, if you will. And it says Al-Majid. Dhul Arsh al-Majidu. It's important that you note that because there's a recitation here. Dhul Arsh al-Majidu. As opposed to Dhul Arsh al-Majidi, because that's a recitation. The first recitation, Dhul Arsh al-Majidu, is recited by the majority of the reciters, and this serves as an adjective to al-Ghafur. وَهُوَ الْغَفُورُ الْوَدُودُ al-Majid. Goes back to that. Meaning it is, al-Majid is referring to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That He is al-Majid. Because al-Majd is the pinnacle of al-Karam, of generosity or nobility, if you will. And of course, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one that's deserving of such a description. There is another recitation, which is recited by Hamza, al-Kasa'i, and Khalaf. All of them recited Dhul Arsh al-Majidi, meaning that al-Majidi is an adjective or a sifa, a quality of the Arsh, right? That it is intrinsically grand, the throne. Allah goes on and says, فَعَالٌ لِمَا يُرِيدُ. He's the doer of whatever He wills, meaning that there's no one that can prevent Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala from what He wants. The next verse reads, هَلْ أَتَاكَ حَدِيثُ الْجُنُودِ. Has there, and when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, هَلْ أَتَاكَ, has there, it means there has come to you. There has reached you. The story of the soldiers. And the soldiers here is general. It's meaning the assembly of disbelievers. Fir'aun wa Thamud. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala clarifies what that assembly of disbelievers is. And He's talking about the forces of Fir'aun and Thamud. And of course, this is being done as an alert to the disbelievers of Mecca. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is drawing their attention to people they're aware of. People that were destroyed. They know of their destruction. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying, look, these people were destroyed. Just as they were destroyed, you as well could end up being destroyed, because these people turned away from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And if you turn away from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you're likely to face similar destruction. And so the idea here is that the people of Mecca, the disbelievers, they would take a lesson and they would embrace faith in Allah Azza wa Jal and reject their idolatry. But He says, بَلِ الَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا فِي تَكْذِيبٍ. So when they didn't accept faith, this verse serves as a strike against them. It says, بَلِ الَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا فِي تَكْذِيبٍ. But they who disbelieve, meaning they disbelieve, He's talking to the Prophet ﷺ, meaning we're talking about those who disbelieve from the people of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. He says they're in denial. In denial of you, O Muhammad, and in denial of the Quran, just like the persistent denial of Fir'aun with Thamud. They had a prophet and messenger, they had a prophet or a prophet and messenger in their presence, calling them to follow, to surrender, to submit to faith, and they were persistently in denial, and it led to their destruction. So He says, بَلِ الَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا فِي تَكْذِيبٍ. They who disbelieve are in denial. وَاللَّهُ مِنْ وَرَائِهِمْ مُحِيطٌ. While Allah encompasses them from behind. And this means that Allah's qudra encompasses them all. Not in a literal, physical way. Okay, so you don't understand that. Allah is literally encompassing them. But here, His qudra, or His divine ability, encompasses them all, and He's not overwhelmed by anything. بَلْ هُوَ قُرْآنٌ مَجِيدٌ. But this, بَلْ هُوَ, what they're denying, it's essentially what they're denying is the Quran, is an honored Quran, grand in status. بَلْ هُوَ قُرْآنٌ مَجِيدٌ فِي لَوْحٍ مَحْفُوظٍ. Recorded in a preserved tablet, which contains no mistake or change. So here, فِي لَوْحٍ مَحْفُوظ, there is a recitation. It says, Nafi' recited it, محفوظ, as an adjective of the Quran. بَلْ هُوَ قُرْآنٌ مَجِيدٌ مَحْفُوظٌ. Understand? بَلْ هُوَ قُرْآنٌ مَجِيدٌ فِي لَوْحٍ وَهُوَ مَحْفُوظٌ. Al-Quran. That's basically what this recitation is meaning. As opposed to the well-known recitation which is recited by the majority, which is فِي لَوْحٍ مَحْفُوظ, as a preserved tablet. So mahfuz is the well-known description of the lawh itself. According to Anas, it's located on the forehead of Israfil. The Quran was written inscribed in the forehead of Israfil, which is the angel. And the reason that is, has been explained, is that Israfil was described to have been the first angel that made sujood to Adam alayhi salam, following the command of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If you remember when Adam was created, etc., and then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala commanded the angels to prostrate to Adam and whoever was among them, and the first to do so was Israfil, prostrating, of course. His prostration is done obviously on the forehead, and so because of that, he was honored with this inscription. Ibn Abbas said, in regards to al-Lawh, he says it's a white pearl that is as tall as the distance between the heavens and the earth, and as wide as the distance between the east and the west. Wallahu a'lam. And that concludes this chapter, Surat al-Buruj, according to our great Mujiruddin, rahimahullah ta'ala. We'll wrap it up with that. Jazakallah khair. Wa sallallahu wa sallam ala nabiyyina Muhammad.